Marcus unfolded the small piece of lined paper wedged beneath the sandwich container at the bottom of his daughter's lunchbox, and something in his chest immediately loosened. He recognized his own handwriting. Or rather, he didn't. The note read, "You are braver than you believe and stronger than you seem. I'm proud of you. Love, Dad." His 7-year-old Emma had started 3rd grade 3 weeks ago, and he'd written that note yesterday morning while she was still asleep, pressing it into her lunchbox in the dark kitchen at 6:47 a.m., just as he did every school day. But this handwriting wasn't his. It was smaller, more careful, the letters slightly slanted left instead of right. His hand froze over the paper, and the kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Marcus was a warehouse manager, 42, with an ex-wife who had moved to Denver 5 years ago, with a man who worked in tech and could offer things Marcus never could. A house with a guest room, ski weekends, the kind of life that felt like it existed only in commercials. Emma stayed with him 7 days a week. No court order demanded it. Her mother simply stopped calling with the regularity she used to, then stopped calling altogether. He'd learned not to ask why. What mattered was that Emma was his full-time, that he made her breakfast, packed her lunch and left notes that were supposed to anchor her to something stable while he worked 10-hour shifts and came home smelling like cardboard and industrial cleaner. The stakes were everything. One slip, one forgotten permission slip or one missed school pickup, and someone would eventually decide he was the problem. He kept his records clean. He kept his daughter closer than other dads seemed to keep theirs. He turned the note over, on the back, in the same careful handwriting. A drawing of a smiling face with rosy cheeks, surrounded by stars and hearts. Emma didn't draw like that anymore. She'd moved past that stage months ago, favored manga characters and realistic horses. Marcus's fingertips began to shake slightly as he pulled out his phone and opened the photo gallery. There, from last Tuesday, was his own note in his actual handwriting. "You are kind, you matter. Love, Dad." Angular, rushed, distinctly his, not this. He sat down hard at the kitchen table. The logical part of his mind assembled the pieces quickly. Either someone had forged his handwriting and planted the note, or Emma had written it herself and attributed it to him, crafting some elaborate fantasy. But why? And who? He held the paper up to the light above the sink, as if transparency might reveal something. The ink looked like the same ballpoint pen he used, but handwriting doesn't lie the way ink can. His vision narrowed. A supervisor at school, another teacher, someone else's parent. The possibilities spiraled into shapes he'd trained himself not to let them take. He called the school without letting himself think first. The office receptionist, Mrs. Chen, picked up after 2 rings. "Is Emma safe?" he asked. "Of course, she's in art class right now. Is everything—" "Who supervised lunch today?" There was a pause. "Usually it's Mrs. Patterson, but she called in sick. One of our parent volunteers covered." "Which parent?" "I'd have to check the log, Marcus. What's this about?" He opened his mouth and closed it. Explaining would sound insane. Instead, he asked Mrs. Chen to have Emma call him after school. No big deal. Just wanted to hear from her early. She said fine, a little confused, the way adults get when someone's tone doesn't match their words. When Emma came home at 3:15 p.m., she was wearing her yellow backpack and one shoe. She kicked off the other one in the hallway. "Hey, bud, good day?" "Normal," she said, which was her 7-year-old way of saying everything had passed without catastrophe. Marcus pulled the note from his back pocket and held it down to her eye level. "Did you write this, Em?" She looked at it. Her face didn't change. "No. Why would I write you a note?" "You didn't find it in your lunchbox." "It was in my lunchbox." She leaned closer, genuinely puzzled now, the way kids are when they're encountering something outside their own action. "That's nice, though. Can I keep it?" He should have felt relief. Instead, a different kind of cold moved through him. The cold of a door opening onto a hallway he hadn't known existed. Someone had written to Emma. Someone was in her life in a way he didn't fully see, and they'd been deliberate enough to forge his name, careful enough to study his handwriting. The note wasn't threatening. It was kind. But kindness, Marcus understood, could be the softest edge of something he couldn't yet name. He folded the paper and slipped it back into his pocket, his fingers closing around it like it was evidence. "It's from me," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you got it." Emma nodded and moved past him into the kitchen, already thinking about the snacks she'd get, what show she'd watch before dinner, the small, necessary rituals of an afternoon that would move forward whether or not her father was present in spirit. But Marcus stayed there in the hallway, the note a small weight against his thigh, and for the first time in 7 years of single parenthood, he felt like there was a part of his daughter's world he didn't control, and that this might not be entirely a bad thing. He unfolded the note one more time before dinner. The handwriting caught the kitchen light again, and he made a decision without fully admitting it to himself. Tomorrow, he would ask Emma about her day with more than usual attention. He would listen not just for safety, but for presence, for the sign of a voice other than his own that had chosen to reach her. The next morning, Marcus stood in the parking lot of Riverside Elementary School 40 minutes before the bell, parked 2 rows over from the main entrance, watching parents drop off their children. He'd called in late to work, something he never did, and had driven Emma to school himself instead of letting her take the bus. Now he sat with the engine off, the September sun climbing steadily, and watched the flow of mothers and fathers and grandparents moving like a river through the glass doors. He didn't have a plan. He was looking for something he couldn't name. A gesture, a pause, a moment when someone's eyes lingered too long on the 3rd grade wing. Emma had chattered the entire ride to school about nothing in particular. A girl named Sophie, who could do a cartwheel, a book she was reading about a dog who solved mysteries. She hadn't mentioned receiving notes. She hadn't mentioned anyone special. He'd driven with one hand on the wheel and the other wrapped around his coffee, nodding at the right moments, his mind elsewhere. When he'd kissed her goodbye at the curb, she'd hugged him harder than usual and said, "You're being weird, Dad." He'd laughed and said he wasn't, and she'd shrugged and walked through the doors, her backpack bouncing. At 10:30 a.m., Marcus was in Mrs. Chen's office at the school, ostensibly asking about Emma's progress in math, a question designed to seem routine. Mrs. Chen pulled up the grades on her computer. Emma was doing fine, above average, and he nodded like that mattered. "The parent volunteer yesterday," he said, as if just remembering. "Who was it?" Mrs. Chen scrolled through her tablet. "That would be David Rothschild. He's been volunteering on Thursdays for about 3 weeks. Emma's in his group during lunch supervision." Marcus felt something shift. David Rothschild. He pulled the name apart in his mind like a sentence in another language, looking for meaning. The name belonged to no one he knew. "He seem okay to you?" Marcus asked. "Good with the kids?" "Very attentive, actually." "Why?" "Just curious. Always good to know who's around Emma." He left the office before Mrs. Chen could ask more questions, his pulse steady but deliberate. In the parking lot, he sat in his truck and opened his phone. David Rothschild, Riverside, found 3 profiles on social media. One showed a man in his mid-50s with grey at the temples, wearing a plaid shirt at what looked like a farmer's market. The photo was from 3 years ago. Marcus scrolled through sparse posts. Pictures of a garden, a rescued dog, links to articles about childhood development. Nothing alarming, everything ordinary. But ordinary was a mask. Marcus knew this in the way he knew his own face. He texted his manager that he'd be in by afternoon and drove to the Riverside Public Library. It took 30 minutes with the librarian to cross-reference volunteer lists from the school district database and local parent groups. David Rothschild lived on Maple Street, 3 blocks from the school. He'd been a teacher once, according to a staff directory from 15 years ago. Then the trail went cold. Marcus didn't go to work that day. Instead, he drove past the address on Maple Street, a small house well-maintained, with a vegetable garden boxed in the front yard. A minivan was parked in the driveway. On the fence, someone had hung bird feeders. Everything spoke of care, of deliberate attention to small things. Marcus felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. He picked Emma up from school at 3:15 p.m., as he always did, and this time he waited until they were home, until she had her snack and water bottle, until she was settled on the couch with her show. "Hey, Em? The volunteer who helped at lunch yesterday. What's his name?" She looked up from the screen. "I don't know. He's nice, though. He has drawings on his arms." "Drawings?" "Tattoos, I guess." I asked him about them, and he told me stories about all of them. Marcus felt the ground shift slightly beneath him. "What kind of stories?" "There's one that's a little girl with pigtails. He said it was someone he knew a long time ago who was really brave. There's another one that's a river, and he said the river was always moving, which meant you could never be stuck in one place forever if you didn't want to be." Emma turned back to the screen. "He said I had brave eyes, like the girl in the tattoo." Marcus stood there, the note from yesterday suddenly heavier in his pocket than when he'd been carrying it. He climbed the stairs to his room and closed the door. The tattoo, the careful handwriting, The note signed with his name as if David Rothschild had been practicing, learning how to speak to Emma through the voice of her father. The thought made his skin prickle with something between rage and a more troubling uncertainty. He spent the evening doing research on his laptop. David Rothschild had been a third-grade teacher at Riverside from 2002 to 2008. Then there was a gap. Then he reappeared 5 years ago, working as a landscaper. No criminal record, no complaints filed, no visible reason for the gap except the absence of a record, which meant nothing and everything. That night, Marcus lay awake beside his sleeping daughter. She'd had a nightmare, which happened rarely, and had climbed into his bed without asking, and stared at the ceiling. The note lay on his nightstand. The handwriting was almost his. The sentiment was almost love. And somewhere in the space between almost and actual, there was a man Marcus had never met who was writing letters to his daughter. By morning, Marcus had decided something. He would go to the school. He would observe this David Rothschild himself, not as a threat to be eliminated, but as a fact to be understood. Because fear, Marcus had learned, was just another word for not knowing. And he would know. Marcus signed up to volunteer at the school's Thursday lunch supervision. He filled out the form at Mrs. Chen's desk, provided his background check clearance, which was already on file, and said he wanted to support the school more. Mrs. Chen smiled and noted him for the rotation. He would start the following week. In the meantime, he waited. He picked Emma up on time. He made her dinner. He read with her before bed. He did everything exactly as he always had, but his attention had split into two frequencies now. One on his daughter, one on the space she moved through when he wasn't there. The note remained on his nightstand, an artifact he consulted like evidence, though he never found anything new in it. On the Thursday, Marcus was scheduled to volunteer. He arrived at the school at 11:45 a.m., 20 minutes before the lunch period began. Mrs. Chen showed him to the cafeteria and paired him with David Rothschild. They didn't introduce themselves. David simply looked up from wiping down the long tables and said, "First time?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "It's easy. Just keep an eye out for choking hazards, broken glass, and make sure no one's trading food allergies around. Mrs. Patterson usually works this shift, but she's still out." Up close, David was smaller than Marcus had expected. Not weak, but compact, like something that had been through weather and survived it. His forearms were visible beneath his rolled sleeves, and Marcus could see the tattoos. A river in blues and greens, a girl with pigtails in black ink. Other images too faded to read from a distance. His hair was entirely grey now, not just at the temples. When he moved, there was an economy to it. Nothing wasted. The children began filing in. Emma saw her father, and her face did something complicated. Pleasure mixed with suspicion at the break in routine. She sat with her usual group and waved. Marcus waved back and felt David notice the exchange. "Your daughter?" David asked, not looking at Marcus directly. "Yeah, Emma, 3rd grade. She's a good listener. Thoughtful." Marcus didn't respond. He watched David move through the cafeteria, supervising the lunch lines with a kind of quiet attention. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The children seemed to respond to him the way they might to a teacher who'd already proven he meant what he said. There were no forced smiles, no overperformance of warmth, just presence. 30 minutes into the period, one of the younger kids, a 1st grader, dropped his tray. The sound was loud in the cafeteria and several children laughed. The boy froze, his face beginning to crumple. David moved immediately, not running, just moving with purpose. He knelt beside the scattered food and said something Marcus couldn't hear. The boy wiped his eyes. Together, they picked up the mess. David got him a new tray from the kitchen. The boy sat back down. No one was making fun anymore because David had made it clear, through his actions alone, that shame had no place here. When lunch ended and the children filed out, Emma hugged Marcus goodbye before heading to her next class. David was stacking chairs when Marcus approached him. "Why did you write that note?" Marcus said. His voice was low, controlled, but the question hung between them like something that had been thrown. David's hands didn't stop moving. He set another chair on the stack. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done it without permission." It wasn't a denial, it wasn't a deflection. It was a straight acknowledgement, and something in Marcus's chest loosened slightly, though he didn't trust the feeling. Why her? David was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands, at the tattoos wrapped around his forearms like a story written on skin. "I had a daughter," David said. "Biological daughter. Her name was Emma, too. She would have been 23 now. Marcus felt the words land in the space between them like stones. Would have been? She died when she was 7. Leukemia. 9 years ago. David's voice didn't break. It was simply factual, the way someone might describe the weather. She loved notes. I used to write them for her to find. Under her pillow, in her lunchbox, in her shoes. She'd carry them around and read them over and over, like they were treasure maps. The last note I wrote her, she was in the hospital. I told her she was the bravest person I'd ever known. He paused. He was looking at the chairs now, his hands still. When I started volunteering here, I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to be around kids again without it destroying me. But Emma, your Emma, she reminded me of something. Not of my daughter exactly, but of what my daughter would have wanted other kids to have. Permission to believe they were brave. Marcus felt his body language shift without deciding to. His shoulders dropped slightly. The note in his pocket, he'd been carrying it like evidence of a crime, suddenly seemed like something else. You forged my handwriting. I did. That was wrong. I should have asked you, or just signed it myself. But I was afraid you'd say no. I was afraid you'd think I was strange, and I wanted so badly to do the thing I used to do just one more time, with someone who reminded me that my daughter had existed, that I hadn't imagined her. Marcus stood there. The cafeteria was empty now except for them. Through the large windows, he could see trees moving in the wind, children on the playground, the ordinary world continuing without any of this mattering to it. I need you to ask permission from now on, Marcus said finally. If you want to write to Emma, you ask me first. You're honest about who you are. You don't forge anything. David turned to look at him directly. His eyes were steady, slightly reddened at the rims, but steady. Okay, he said, I can do that. And you tell me about her, Marcus continued. And he didn't know why he was saying this, but the words felt necessary. About your Emma, so I know who I'm talking to. Are you sure? No, Marcus said, but Emma deserves to know where kindness comes from. And so do I. 3 weeks later, Marcus and David sat on the bench outside the school while Emma was in her after-school art class. It wasn't planned. It had simply become routine. Marcus would arrive 15 minutes early on Thursdays, and David would be there, waiting. At first, they'd sat in silence. Now they didn't always. She asked me about your Emma, Marcus said. He was holding a coffee he'd started bringing for David, black, no sugar. The small gesture had become a test he passed each time without thinking. Asked if she had a favorite color, a favorite food, things like that. David nodded. He was looking at his hands. What did you tell her? I said she did, and that you could tell her about it if you wanted to. I didn't promise anything. That's fair. David took a sip of the coffee. Emma, my Emma, she loved orange, all shades of it. She said it was the color of happy. She also loved cashew butter on apples, which everyone else found disgusting. They sat with that for a moment. The playground was full of children running, screaming, existing without knowing that this bench held 2 men, holding the weight of a dead child and the living one. I'm thinking about cutting back hours at the warehouse, Marcus said. Picking Emma up earlier on Thursdays. Maybe she could stay for an hour after school sometimes if you wanted to do homework help or something. David didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was careful. You'd trust me with her? I'm trying to, Marcus said. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying. The real test came on a Thursday in early October. Marcus arrived at the school at his usual time, but David wasn't at the bench. He checked the cafeteria. David was there, but he was sitting instead of standing, and his face had a grey quality to it that Marcus recognized from his own reflection after 12-hour shifts. Mrs. Chen noticed Marcus's concern. David's been under the weather, she said. I told him to go home, but he said he'd committed to the lunch shift. Marcus found himself walking across the cafeteria toward David. The impulse surprised him, this instinct to move toward instead of away from. You're sick, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well. You look like hell. Marcus checked his phone. It was 12:15 p.m. He texted his manager, taking the rest of the day. Emergency. We'll make up hours Saturday. Then he looked at David. Come on, let me drive you home. David started to protest, but Marcus cut him off, not asking. In the truck, David gave him directions to Maple Street. They drove in silence. When they pulled into the driveway, Marcus turned off the engine and waited while David sat there, breathing like someone who'd run a distance. My daughter's birthday was yesterday, David said finally. Would have been. Emma. I usually let myself be sick on that day. I let myself feel it all at once, and then the next day I'm done. I shouldn't have come to school. Marcus understood something then, that David had been trying to be normal for him, for Emma, and that the effort of it had cost him. He got out of the truck and helped David out. Inside the house it was clean and quiet, and suffused with a kind of loneliness Marcus recognized from his own life. On the refrigerator were drawings, children's drawings, some recent, some very old. One was dated 15 years ago in adult handwriting, Emma, age 6, our family tree. The tree had 3 stick figures holding hands. Marcus made David tea and sat with him on the couch. They didn't talk. The silence wasn't heavy, it was permissive. When David fell asleep, Marcus didn't leave. He stayed until 4 p.m., then drove back to the school to pick up Emma. She noticed immediately. "Where's David? He's not feeling well. He needed to rest. Is he okay?" There was real concern in her voice, the kind that told Marcus something had already shifted in his daughter's world. She had someone to worry about now besides him. "He will be," Marcus said. "We'll check on him tomorrow." The next day after school, Marcus and Emma stopped at the grocery store. Emma picked out ingredients for cashew butter cookies. She'd remembered, or David had told her enough times, that it had lodged in her memory. They baked them together in the kitchen, and Emma insisted on putting them in a container to bring to David. Marcus didn't argue. When they arrived at the house on Maple Street, David answered the door looking less grey, though not entirely restored. Emma handed him the container, and he opened it immediately. And for a moment his face did something that Marcus recognized as the face of someone who was being remembered, being held in someone else's thought. "These are perfect," David said. "My Emma would have loved these." Emma looked up at him. "I want to know more about her, about what she liked. Will you tell me?" David looked at Marcus. Marcus nodded. They sat in David's living room, and David told her about his Emma. Not everything. He was careful about that, careful to keep it age-appropriate, to give her the version that would help Emma understand kindness rather than fear death. He talked about a girl who laughed at knock-knock jokes and wanted to be a veterinarian and once tried to teach a turtle to dance. Emma listened with the intensity of a child learning something that mattered. When it was time to leave, Emma hugged David. He held her carefully, like she might break, and Marcus saw the exact moment he let go, when he decided she was real and wouldn't disappear if he held her too long. In the truck, Emma fell asleep. When Marcus got home, he carried her upstairs and laid her down in bed. In the kitchen, he found the note, the original one that David had forged, the one he'd been carrying for weeks. He'd left it on the counter that morning without meaning to. He picked it up now and read it again. The handwriting was David's, not his, but the sentiment had become real through repetition and risk. He took a pen and wrote underneath, in his own hand, "And brave enough to let others help carry the weight. Love, Dad." He placed it in Emma's lunchbox for tomorrow's school day, not as a secret anymore, but as a message everyone involved could see. On Saturday morning, Marcus received a text from David. "Thank you, for yesterday, for today, for not running." He didn't respond in words. Instead, he sent a photo. Emma asleep at the kitchen table, flour still in her hair, surrounded by cooling cookies. Below it, he typed, "She's still here."